My mother used to press wildflowers between the pages of old phone books. Not because anyone taught her to. Just because she said it felt wrong to let beautiful things disappear without leaving some kind of mark. She kept those phone books in a shoebox under her bed in the apartment where she and my father lived for 26 years, the one with the radiator that clanged all winter and the kitchen window that never quite sealed against the cold. I grew up in that apartment. I know every creak of its floors, every shadow the streetlight threw across the ceiling at night, and I know exactly how much my parents deserve to leave it. My name is Leigh, and I'm 34 years old. I work as a registered nurse at a regional hospital in Hamilton, Ontario, and for the past 6 years, through night shifts and double shifts, and the particular kind of exhaustion that gets into your bones and stays there, I have been saving money into an account I named simply Home. Not a vacation fund, not a car fund, not a treat-yourself account, a home fund for them. My father, Ray, spent 33 years driving long-haul freight across Ontario and Quebec. The kind of work that takes a man away from his family for stretches of time that are long enough to matter. Short enough that nobody ever says anything about it. He missed school plays and a few Christmases and the night I came home from prom, but he was always there in the way that counted most. Steady, dependable, arriving home with that specific smell of diesel and road that I still associate with safety. My mother, June, worked part-time at a community center for most of my childhood, leading craft sessions for seniors, and after-school programs for kids whose parents worked the kind of hours that made daycare impossible. She did it because she loved it. She also did it because the income helped, and she was not a woman who pretended otherwise. They were careful people. Careful with money, careful with words, careful with the feelings of everyone around them. They never owned a home. The timing was never right. The down payment always just out of reach. The market always climbing faster than they could save. Life always having another expense waiting around the corner. By the time I was finishing my nursing degree, they were in their late 50s, and the idea of a mortgage had become something they'd stopped discussing. I never stopped thinking about it. When I found the listing 8 months ago, it was a Thursday in February, and I was eating reheated soup in the break room between a morning shift and an afternoon one. A 3-bedroom bungalow with a finished basement and a backyard backing onto a greenbelt, 40 minutes outside the city in a town called Elora. The kind of town my parents used to drive us through on Sunday afternoons when I was small, just to look at the stone buildings and the river and the life that felt quiet in a way our apartment never was. Listed at $489,000. I had $310,000 in savings. I called my credit union the next morning and asked about a bridge loan against my pension contributions. I didn't sleep much that week. I put in an offer on the following Tuesday. I told 2 people. My younger brother, Scott, who lives in Calgary and who helped me coordinate the logistics from a distance, keeping my parents occupied and unsuspecting across 4 time zones. And my husband, Owen. Owen knew about the savings account. He'd always known about it. I'm not the kind of person who keeps financial things hidden from my spouse, and he had his own savings account labeled truck because he wanted to restore a 1978 Ford F-150 that had belonged to his grandfather. We had separate savings goals and a shared life, and that arrangement had always worked for us. He was supportive from the start. He said, "Your parents deserve this," and he meant it, and I believed him, and that's where I'll have to pause for a moment, because what happened next requires you to understand something about his family first. Owen's mother is a woman named Darlene. Darlene is the kind of woman who makes everything about proximity to herself. If something good happens to someone she loves, she finds a way to stand close enough to it that the reflected light lands on her. If something good happens to someone she doesn't love, or someone she has decided is beneath her notice, she finds a way to redirect. She had decided, within about 3 months of Owen and I dating, that I was competent but not impressive. Capable but not exceptional. She said things like, "Leigh is very practical," in the same tone other people use to say, "Leigh has a good personality." She made comments about my parents, about my father's work, about the apartment they lived in, about the fact that my mother had never finished her degree. Small comments. The kind that could always be walked back with "I only meant," or "You're being too sensitive." I'd absorbed 6 years of those comments because Owen always said he'd handle it, and because I genuinely believed that what I was building for my parents had nothing to do with Darlene at all. I was wrong about that. The plan for my parents' anniversary was simple. My father's 61st birthday fell on the same weekend as their 35th wedding anniversary, a coincidence that had always meant the celebrations got folded into one. This year, I told them I'd booked a nice dinner in town and that we'd spend the weekend together. I asked them to dress nicely. My mother wore the green wrap dress she saves for occasions she wants to remember. Owen and I drove out to Elora 2 days early to set things up. I'd ordered a cedar patio set for the backyard, hung a string of warm lights along the fence line, and arranged a table inside with framed photographs. Their wedding portrait, a photo from their first summer in Canada, pictures of Scott and me at various ages. A few from camping trips I'd forgotten I remembered until I saw them again. The plan was for Scott to call my parents Saturday morning, with some story about needing them to look at a property on his behalf, a favor for a colleague. They'd drive out, thinking they were doing their son a kindness, and instead they'd find their daughter waiting on the front porch of their own house. Darlene and Owen's father, Keith, had offered, with what I can now see was a specific kind of eagerness, to come out Friday afternoon and help finish the setup, while Owen and I drove back into the city to pick up my parents from the hotel where they'd been staying since flying in from Edmonton. I want to be honest about this. I should have questioned that eagerness. Darlene does not typically volunteer for tasks that don't benefit her directly. But I was distracted and grateful, and I told myself that people can surprise you. I told Owen to give them the spare key I'd been keeping in my bag, and I didn't think about it again until we pulled into the driveway on Saturday afternoon, and I knew, before I had even stepped out of the car, that something was wrong. The patio lights were gone. The cedar chairs had been moved off the back deck and stacked against the side of the house, and standing on the front porch, with the particular posture of someone who has already decided how a conversation is going to end, was Darlene. My mother stepped out of the passenger seat first. She was smiling, still thinking this was a favor errand for Scott, and she made it halfway up the front walk before Darlene came down the porch steps and put a hand up. Not a wave, a stop, and said, clearly and without hesitation, "This is a private property. You need to leave." My mother stopped walking. She looked at me. Then she looked at the hand. Then she looked back at me. My father had come around from the other side of the car, and he stopped too, and in the silence that followed, I watched something happen to his face that I haven't been able to stop thinking about since. He didn't get angry. He didn't say anything. He just went very still in the way that men who have spent a lifetime being careful go still when they realize something has gone wrong and they don't yet know the shape of it. My mother's eyes filled. She hadn't done anything. She had worn her good dress and flown in from Alberta to have dinner with her daughter and her son-in-law, and she was standing on a front walk, being told to leave by a woman she barely knew, and she didn't understand why, and neither, as far as she was concerned, did I, because as far as she knew, this was a stranger's house. That was the part I couldn't stand. The confusion on her face. The way she kept looking at me like I had an explanation that would make this make sense. I had been standing by the car. I had been very still, the way I get still when something is serious. It's a thing I learned in nursing, how to not react outwardly when everything inside you is moving fast. I walked toward the porch. Darlene turned when she heard my footsteps, and for just a second, less than a second really, I saw something on her face that confirmed what I had already started to understand. It wasn't surprise. It wasn't embarrassment. It was the expression of someone who has been caught doing something deliberate and is already composing the explanation. "Leigh," she said, and she smoothed the front of her jacket the way she always does when she's about to say something she's rehearsed. "I can explain this." "Okay," as I said. I kept my voice the same way I keep it when I'm telling a patient something they're not going to want to hear. Steady. Unhurried. Not unkind, but not soft either. "Explain it." She said that she and Keith had been talking, and that Owen had mentioned, in passing apparently weeks ago, that we were considering buying property outside the city eventually. She said that, given the location, given everything, she had assumed this was a purchase for the family broadly. She used that word, broadly. She said that she and Keith had simply started moving a few things in to help make it feel like home, and that she hadn't realized there had been a misunderstanding until just now. I let that sit. Then I said, "You assumed that a property I purchased with my own savings, that I never once discussed with you, that has my name on the deed, was a family investment." She started to say something about how things between families work, about how these decisions affect everyone, about how she was only trying to contribute. "Whose name is on the deed?" The voice came from behind me. Owen had pulled in behind us and walked up the driveway while Darlene was talking, and I hadn't heard him arrive. He was standing at the edge of the front walk, and his face had gone the particular flat color it goes when he's angry in a way he's working very hard to control. His mother looked at him. Owen, whose name? She said. Mine, quietly. Then it's not a family property. It's my wife's gift to her parents, and you had no right to touch anything inside that house, let alone tell her mother to leave. He looked past her into the doorway, where Keith was standing with his hands in his pockets and the expression of a man who would very much like to be somewhere else. Dad, Owen said. Did you know what she was planning? Keith nodded. It was a small nod, the kind that tries to take up as little space as possible. But it was unambiguous, and it told me everything I needed to know. This had not been a spontaneous misreading of the situation. This had been discussed, decided, executed. I didn't say anything else to either of them. I walked past Darlene into the house. What I found inside stopped me for a moment, even though I'd been bracing myself. Darlene and Keith's things had been arranged with the specific care of people who intended to stay. Not moved in tentatively, not stacked in corners, arranged. Darlene's ceramic lamp on the side table by the window. Their kitchen things in the cupboards. A framed photo of Owen as a child on the mantel, next to the space where my parents' wedding portrait had been sitting 2 days ago, now leaning against the baseboard with its face to the wall. I stood there with my parents' wedding photo in my hands, turned away from the room like it had been put in a corner for misbehaving, and I felt something settle in me that has nothing to do with anger. Anger moves. This was something that goes still. I put the photo back on the mantel. Then I started carrying their things out. Owen joined me without a word. He carried out the lamp, a set of dishes, a wicker basket that had been placed decoratively on the kitchen counter as though it had always lived there. Keith followed silently, carrying things to their car with the particular efficiency of someone who knows the argument is over. He didn't look at Owen. He didn't look at me. Darlene stood on the porch for most of it. She made one more attempt, something about how she had only wanted to make sure that the family had something to hold on to, some security. And I stopped what I was doing, and I looked at her directly, and I said, "This was never yours to hold on to. This is 35 years of my parents' marriage and 100 night shifts and every dollar I didn't spend on myself so that they could have one thing they never got to have. You don't get credit for that, you don't get proximity to that, and you don't get to stand on their porch." She left. The silence after their car pulled out of the driveway was nothing like the silence that had fallen when we arrived. That silence had been the kind that comes with damage. This silence was the kind that comes after. My mother was still standing on the front walk. My father had his arm around her, and she was leaning into him the way she does when she's trying to hold something in. I went to her. I said, "Mom, this is your house." She looked at me. She looked at my father. She looked at the house, at the porch, at the front door, at the number plate I'd ordered custom in the same font as the street sign in the neighborhood where I grew up. She said, "What do you mean? This is our house." And I said, "I mean it has your name on it. Yours and Dad's. I bought it for you. For your anniversary. It's yours." My father made a sound I have never heard him make before. Not a sob. My father is not a man who sobs. More like something unlocking. The single sound of a man who has been holding a particular tension for 35 years and has just been told he can put it down. My mother put both hands over her mouth. She stood there for a long moment, and then she walked up the front steps, slowly, like she was testing whether they were real, and she pushed open the front door and she stepped inside. I watched her walk through the front hall. I watched her run her hand along the kitchen counter. I watched her stop in front of the window over the sink that looks out onto the backyard and the greenbelt beyond it. The one I'd picked specifically because I knew she would stand there in the mornings with her coffee and have something green to look at. And I watched her shoulders drop in a way that told me she was crying, though I couldn't see her face. My father stood beside me on the porch for a moment. He looked at the door. He looked at me. He put his hand on the back of my head the way he used to when I was small briefly, the way men of his generation express the things they don't have language for. Then he walked inside after her. Owen found me on the front steps a few minutes later. He sat down next to me and we didn't say anything for a while. Eventually he said, "I'm sorry about my mother." I said, "I know." He said, "That should have been their moment from the beginning." "All of it," I said. "We can still give them most of it." And we did. Owen restrung the lights along the fence while I reset the dining room, repositioned the photos, put out the food the caterer had left boxed in the kitchen, found the wildflower arrangement I'd ordered from a florist in town, and placed it in the center of the table. My brother called at 7 o'clock from Calgary, and my mother answered his FaceTime still crying, and Scott cried too, And my father pretended he wasn't crying by going to stand in the backyard for a few minutes and coming back in with red eyes and a story about allergies that no one believed. We ate dinner at a table in a house that had my parents' names on the deed and wildflowers in the middle of it. And the green belt went dark beyond the kitchen window, and my mother kept getting up from her chair to touch things. The countertop, the windowsill, the door frame, like she was making sure they were still there. My father didn't say much all evening. He doesn't, when something matters. He ate slowly and listened, and at one point he looked around the room, at the photos, at the flowers, at my mother, at me, and he just nodded, the way he does when words would be insufficient and he knows it. Late that night, after Owen had gone up to bed, I found my parents on the back porch. My father had found the Muskoka chairs I'd ordered and pulled them out, and my mother was sitting with her feet tucked up under her, and a blanket from inside across her lap, even though it wasn't that cold. They were just sitting there in the quiet, looking at the tree line where the greenbelt began, not talking. I stood in the doorway for a moment without saying anything. My mother noticed me and reached out her hand, and I went and sat on the arm of her chair, and she held my hand the same way she used to when I was small, and had woken from a bad dream, and needed to be reminded that the house was solid, and the night outside was just the night. My father said, without looking away from the trees, "I drove past a place like this once, outside of Guelph. I had a delivery, and I took a wrong turn, and I ended up on this road with houses like this, with the space and the quiet. I sat there for a minute before I figured out where I was." He paused. I thought about it for a long time after. I never told anyone. My mother squeezed my hand. The greenbelt was dark and still, and the string lights Owen had restrung made small points of warmth along the fence. And the three of us sat there without speaking while the night went on around us. The particular kind of silence that isn't empty but full. The kind that comes when something long-awaited has finally, quietly, arrived. 35 years of careful living finally held in a house that couldn't be taken from them. A home with their name on it, and wildflowers on the table, and all the space in the world to be still.